A woman was found dead in her own home, but detectives couldn't find a single clue to explain what had happened. At first, it seemed like the answer would be simple, but the deeper they dug, the more unexpected the case became. In the end, they were able to uncover the truth, but no one could have predicted just how shocking it would be. Randy Trimble was born on December 15, 1974, in Virginia. She was an only child, raised by her mom on her own. From a young age, Randy was drawn to the arts. She played the flute, acted in school plays, and even was part of the school band. After graduating high school, she went on to study at Bloomsburg University in Pennsylvania, where she studied to become a speech therapist. Randy had a real passion for working with kids and gave it everything she had. Her mom was working multiple jobs to cover her tuition, and Randy didn't take that for granted. She kept her grades very high and eventually earned a scholarship that covered her entire graduate program. During college, she also started dating a guy named Brian. Not long after graduation, the two got married. But what should have been one of the happiest moments in their lives came with heartbreaking news. Just before the wedding, Brian was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, a serious degenerative illness that could lead to permanent disability. Still, Randy didn't walk away. She stayed by his side and promised to support him, no matter how the disease progressed. The couple settled in the small town of Camp Hill, where Randy landed a solid job at a local medical center. With that steady income, she was able to buy a house, and from there, she and Brian started building a life together. They dreamed of having kids and were putting money aside in case Brian's condition got worse and he could no longer work. To make sure they'd be financially secure, Randy even took on a second job, despite already earning a solid income from her full-time position. January 10, 2003 started out like any other day. Randy, who was 28 at the time, went to work at the hospital and finished her shift around 5 p.m. After that, she headed to her second job, stayed there for a few hours, and then went home. Brian had finished work a bit earlier that day, but he'd made plans to meet up with a friend in a nearby town. Around 8 p.m., he got back home, and right away, he could tell something wasn't right. The house was dark, and Randy didn't seem to be there. Inside, the house was a mess. Things were scattered across the floor, like someone had torn the place apart looking for something. Brian checked every room, called out for Randy, but she was nowhere to be found. Eventually, he stepped into the garage and was met with a heartbreaking scene. Randy was lying on the floor in a pool of blood, with a strand of Christmas lights wrapped tightly around her neck. He immediately called 911, but it was too late. All paramedics could do was pronounce her dead. Police turned Randy's body over to the medical examiner and began combing through the crime scene. But there wasn't much to go on. There was no sign of forced entry, no murder weapon, and no obvious clues pointing to a suspect. Forensics collected every fingerprint they could find and sent them off to the lab, hoping one of them might belong to the killer. They also discovered that some cash and a few of Randy's valuables were missing, including a gold diamond ring. Meanwhile, the medical examiner made a chilling discovery. Randy had been stabbed 27 times. That's what ultimately killed her. The examiner also noted that the killer had tried to strangle her, but failed. There were no signs of sexual assault. So at first glance, it looked like Randy had been killed during a robbery. One of the windows in the house had been left unlocked, and detectives believed the killer might have gotten in that way. But right from the start, they had serious doubts about that theory. The level of violence suggested something far more personal, and soon they started looking at her husband as a potential suspect. Friends and family told investigators that Randy and Brian had been having some problems in their marriage. Most of it centered around Brian's illness. Randy was always preparing for the worst, trying to save as much money as possible in case his condition got worse. Brian, on the other hand, didn't want to think about any of that. He felt like they shouldn't have to live every day in survival mode. Those differences led to a lot of arguments, and for detectives, that was enough to see it as a potential motive. Still, detectives quickly confirmed that Brian had a solid alibi. The medical examiner put Randy's time of death at around 7:30 p.m., but at that exact moment, Brian was in another town meeting up with a friend. Police checked it out and confirmed he'd been at a cafe with several customers and employees backing up his story. There simply wasn't enough time for him to drive home and commit the murder. The town where he met his friend was about an hour away, so police ruled him out as a suspect. Randy's family stood by him too, insisting there was no way he could have hurt her. And honestly, detectives weren't sure he even had the physical strength to pull off something that violent. His condition was still in the early stages, but Brian was already having a hard time with anything physical. With Brian ruled out, police turned their attention to other possible suspects, but the complete lack of evidence made things incredibly difficult. Forensics hadn't found any usable fingerprints, no DNA, and nothing else that could point them in the right direction. So detectives started focusing on the people closest to Randy, still convinced that the motive was personal. They spoke with her friends and coworkers, but no one could think of a single person who might have wanted to hurt her. Randy didn't have enemies, and in recent years, she'd been fully focused on her family. Weeks went by with no progress. Detectives had no solid leads and no other suspects. So eventually, they found themselves circling back to Brian, wondering if there was any possible way he could have pulled this off. Even though Brian's alibi held up, his behavior after the murder raised some eyebrows. Not long after Randy's death, he moved to another town to be closer to his family and started skipping work regularly. He also completely cut off contact with Randy's mother, even though they'd been very close before. What really caught people's attention was how he suddenly started spending money. Brian bought a new TV, an Xbox, decked out his place with brand new furniture, and started buying all sorts of stuff he definitely didn't need. His friends tried to talk to him about it, but Brian just brushed it off, saying, "Grieving can get expensive." He also mentioned he was expecting insurance payouts, one for the stolen jewelry and another for Randy's death. In the meantime, he said he was dipping into the savings they had built together. Brian's behavior definitely raised some red flags, but as long as his alibi held, there wasn't much police could do. So, they decided to dig a little deeper and went to speak with his coworkers. Brian worked in the IT department at an insurance company, and detectives started asking around to see if anyone had noticed anything unusual. That's when they got something interesting. One woman who knew Brian fairly well told investigators that he used to talk a lot about the problems in his marriage. According to her, he often complained that Randy was too controlling, constantly monitoring their spending and making him feel like he couldn't live his own life. Things had gotten so bad, she said, that just a few weeks before Randy's death, Brian told his coworkers he was planning to file for divorce. But then, seemingly out of nowhere, he changed his tune. He started insisting everything was fine between them and that divorce was no longer on the table. Before wrapping up the interview, the woman suggested detectives talk to another coworker, someone Brian had been especially close to. The coworker's name was Blaine, and like Brian, he worked in the IT department. The two had hit it off over their shared love of video games and horror movies. Blaine had even written a script for a low-budget film he dreamed of making one day, something in the style of the Blair Witch Project. Brian loved the idea, and the two of them talked about it non-stop at work. But according to another coworker, something shifted in the weeks before Randy's murder. The movie talk stopped. So did the usual video game banter. Instead, they started keeping to themselves, whispering quietly, like they didn't want anyone else hearing what they were saying. After hearing this, detectives started to wonder if Blaine knew something about Randy's death. But instead of dragging him in for questioning right away, they decided to play it smart and see if they could get more out of Brian first. They kept in regular contact with Brian, checking in under the pretense of following up on small details. By then, he was used to the constant questions. But this time, detectives asked him to revisit the crime scene and walk them through everything that had happened on that fateful night. Brian agreed, and that's when things got interesting. As he walked them through the moment he found Randy's body, his story didn't match what he told them just weeks earlier. Back then, he said he hadn't touched her and called 911 right away. Now, he claimed he had held her hand and pulled her into his arms. There were other inconsistencies too, small details that didn't match up with his earlier statements. To detectives, it was a red flag. From that point on, they kept the pressure on. They stayed in contact with Brian, not so much to get new information, but to keep him on edge, nervous, and constantly aware that police were watching him. They even tapped his phone and started following him everywhere he went, making sure he knew it. That continued until detectives were ready to move into the final phase of their plan. In early May, 5 months after Randy's murder, they brought her husband in for another interview and started laying out their suspicions. They laid it all out: Brian's odd behavior, the holes in his story, the spending, the things his coworkers had said. Then, one of the detectives said something that shifted the tone completely. "We understand you didn't kill Randy, but we also know you know who did." And that's when their strategy finally paid off. After a long silence, Brian asked his mother, who was sitting in the room with him, to step outside. Once she was gone, he turned to the detectives and said he was ready to tell them everything, as long as they agreed not to seek the death penalty. The police agreed to the deal, and Brian finally started talking. He admitted that things between him and Randy had gotten pretty bad. He said she was always trying to control him, especially when it came to money. He resented her for it, felt like he could never buy what he wanted, and that frustration had been building up for years. Then, he became close friends with Blaine and got excited about the horror movie Blaine had been working on. Brian wanted in. He even helped with the script. The story was about 5 friends who set off on a hike through the Appalachian Mountains. Along the way, they stumble upon an abandoned mining town and accidentally release the vengeful spirit of a dead man, who then begins hunting them down. Blaine and Brian had everything lined up for the shoot, but they had one major problem: money. Even though the film was meant to be low budget, they still needed a decent chunk of money for actor salaries, equipment, and other expenses. According to Blaine's estimates, they were going to need over $10,000. Blaine couldn't come up with that kind of cash, so Brian offered to fund the production himself. He planned to use the savings he and Randy had set aside, the money she'd been putting away in case his health got worse. His plan was simple. He and Blaine would make the movie, catch the attention of some big studios, and eventually turn a profit. Once that happened, Brian would pay the money back, with interest. But Randy didn't like that idea. She was skeptical about putting that much of their savings into such a risky project. She also didn't think it was a good idea for Brian to be involved, given his condition. Filming would require him to spend several days out in the Appalachian Mountains, completely off the grid. In the end, Brian had to back out of the film entirely, and Blaine wasn't happy about it. Still, he eventually managed to pull the money together, hired some actors, and went off to the mountains to start shooting without Brian. For about a week, he filmed non-stop, and according to everyone involved, Blaine was absolutely thrilled. But behind the scenes, he had a serious problem. To fund the project, Blaine maxed out every credit card he had, including his wife's. She didn't know what he'd done until the bills started rolling in. When she realized he'd racked up over $18,000 in debt, she left him, taking their newborn son with her. Still, Blaine believed the film would fix everything. But now he couldn't afford to edit it, much less promote it, and without that, the project was dead in the water. That's when Brian stepped back in. He still wanted to be a part of the film and was more than willing to help fund its release. But there was one big obstacle standing in their way: Randy. That's when the two of them started thinking, how could they get access to her savings? And eventually, they came to a horrifying conclusion. The easiest way was to kill her. Over the next few months, Brian and Blaine worked on what they thought would be the perfect murder. pulling ideas from the horror movies they both loved so much. The plan was simple. They'd make it look like Randy had been killed during a robbery, which would also trigger an insurance payout for the stolen jewelry. On top of that, they expected to collect $100,000 from Randy's life insurance. They also knew they had to make sure Brian didn't come under suspicion. On the day of the murder, the two men left work early and went back to Brian's house, where they trashed the place to stage the scene. Then, Brian drove to a nearby town to meet up with a friend, setting up his alibi, and Blaine stayed behind, waiting for Randy. When she walked through the door, he attacked her. At first, he tried to strangle her with a cord, but Randy fought back harder than he expected. That's when Blaine grabbed a knife and stabbed her repeatedly. After the attack, he fled the scene and got rid of the rubber gloves he'd worn to avoid leaving any trace behind. About an hour later, Brian returned home and called the police, claiming he just found his wife's body. Before wrapping up his confession, Brian admitted he was shocked by just how brutal his friend had been. He said that when they met up a few days after the murder, Blaine described the whole thing in graphic detail, and it actually made Brian feel sick. When detectives asked how he could do something like this to his own wife, a woman who cared for him and planned a future with him, Brian calmly replied that he was just trying to spare her the pain she would have felt from a divorce. With that, Brian was arrested and held in jail while he waited for trial. But for investigators, the case was far from over. Now they had a new challenge, finding solid evidence that could tie Blaine to the murder, because Brian's word alone wasn't going to cut it. Detectives obtained a warrant to search Blaine's car, and inside, they found a receipt with some suspicious items. On the day of the murder, Blaine had purchased rubber gloves, work gloves, a black hoodie, and black pants. Police then went to the store and asked staff to check if any other purchases had been made with the same credit card. That's when they got their big break. The system showed that the same card had also been used to buy a large knife. Detectives obtained the exact same model and brought it to the medical examiner, who confirmed that the blade matched the wounds found on Randy's body. But then, detectives ran into an unexpected problem. After speaking with Blaine's friends, they learned that he also had an alibi. Two of his friends claimed they saw him at his apartment around 7:30 p.m., the approximate time of the murder. If that were true, there wouldn't have been enough time for him to get from Randy's house back to his place. The friends also mentioned that after hanging out with Blaine, they stopped at a gas station. Police pulled the receipt to verify the timeline, and that's when they made a key discovery. The time was off. The receipt showed that the friends stopped at the gas station at 8:30 p.m., not 7:30. That meant he had more than enough time to kill Randy and get back home by that time. With all the evidence finally lining up, detectives charged Blaine with murder and placed him under arrest. Up to that point, they'd had almost no direct interaction with him, and when they showed up at his door, Blaine fainted on the spot. Despite all the evidence stacked against him, Blaine refused to confess and kept claiming he was innocent. But as the trial got closer, and prosecutors announced they'd be going after the death penalty, he suddenly changed his tune. In exchange for taking that off the table, Blaine agreed to a plea deal. He admitted to killing Randy and said he was hoping to get $20,000 from her life insurance to pay off his debts. In the end, both men were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, and to this day, they remain behind bars. After Randy's death, her mother started a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping victims of domestic violence. It's still active to this day and has helped hundreds of people in need. Jessica Lynn Kaler was born on May 8, 1982, in Austin, Texas. She lived there with her parents and two brothers until the family later moved to a small town called Pflugerville. Jessica was warm, friendly, and easy to get along with. Making friends came naturally to her. But she wasn't just social, she was also incredibly driven. Even in high school, she had a clear goal. She wanted to be a teacher. To make that dream a reality, she enrolled at Texas State University, where she earned her bachelor's degree in science. But she didn't stop there. Jessica decided to continue her education and work toward a master's degree. At the same time, she took a job as a teaching assistant at an elementary school. On top of that, she worked part-time at a grocery store. With student loans to pay off and bills stacking up, she had no choice but to juggle multiple jobs. But even with her packed schedule, she never lost her positive spirit. Jessica believed that all the hard work would eventually pay off, and she was determined to make it happen. In September 2009, at 27 years old, Jessica was still balancing her studies with 2 jobs. She was hopeful that soon she'd land a full-time teaching position at her school and finally focus on the career she had always dreamt of. On September 7th, Jessica had the day off, so she spent it with her friends and her cousin, Melanie. They started the day by hanging out at the pool, then went out for dinner. Later, they stopped by a bar, played some pool, and when the night wrapped up, Jessica took on the role of designated driver, making sure everyone got home safely. Melanie was the last one she dropped off. By then, it was almost 1:30 in the morning. She offered Jessica to stay the night, but Jessica declined. She had an early shift at the grocery store and needed to stop by a 24-hour store to grab some food for her dogs. So, after saying goodbye to her cousin, she headed out. A few hours later, as morning approached, Melanie got a call from one of Jessica's coworkers. She told her that Jessica hadn't shown up for her shift, which was pretty strange because Jessica had never skipped work without a good reason. Plus, by that time, she had been promoted to store manager, which meant even more responsibility. Melanie started to worry and called a few friends, but none of them had heard from Jessica that morning. Next, she reached out to her brother John. He and Jessica shared an apartment, but he told her he hadn't seen her either. John worked as a police officer and had started his shift at 5:30 a.m. He hadn't noticed whether Jessica had come home during the night and hadn't checked her room before leaving for work. Concerned, he immediately drove back home, but Jessica wasn't there. In fact, it didn't even look like she had returned the night before. Her dogs were acting strangely, almost as if they hadn't been fed in a while. That set off alarms. Something was definitely wrong. Without wasting any time, John reached out to his colleagues at the police department, asking them to track Jessica's phone. Following the signal, police traced it to a restaurant not far from her home. Melanie and her boyfriend rushed to the location, and it didn't take long for them to spot Jessica's car in the parking lot. But as soon as they got closer and opened the door, they were met with a horrifying sight. Jessica was in the driver's seat, completely unresponsive. Her body was covered in visible sunburns, and inside the car, it was unbearably hot. Melanie's boyfriend called the police, who dispatched officers and an ambulance to the scene. Paramedics confirmed that Jessica was dead, and her body was sent for further examination. But one thing was already clear. It looked like she'd been attacked. Meanwhile, investigators began examining Jessica's car, and one of the first things they noticed was that the driver's seat was pushed way too far back. Considering the injuries on her body, detectives suspected she might have been attacked right there in the car. They also discovered that her keys, wallet, and credit cards were missing. On the back seat, they found a bag of dog food, suggesting that Jessica had been there since the night before. After all, she had planned to stop at the store right after dropping off her cousin. After thoroughly searching the car, detectives went into the restaurant near the parking lot where Jessica's car had been found. And that's when things took a shocking turn. One of the restaurant employees told investigators that when she arrived at work early that morning, she noticed Jessica's car. But at that time, Jessica was still alive. According to the witness, Jessica was sitting inside her car completely undressed and acting strangely, almost as if she was under the influence. Despite how bizarre the scene was, the employee didn't think much of it and went inside to start her shift. A little while later, she stepped outside again. This time, Jessica was sitting next to her car. She had put her clothes back on, but was still behaving oddly, just sitting there, running her hands through her hair. The third time the employee went outside, Jessica was back in her car, talking to herself and making strange hand gestures. Police found several more witnesses who had seen Jessica alive that morning, but despite her unusual behavior, not a single person called for help or even checked to see if she was okay. After speaking with the witnesses, detectives went back to Melanie and asked if Jessica could have been under the influence of alcohol or something stronger. But her cousin was adamant Jessica had been completely sober that night. She was the designated driver, responsible for getting everyone home safely, and she had work in the morning. As for drugs, Melanie insisted that Jessica had never touched them in her life. None of it made sense to investigators, but soon they stumbled upon a possible explanation for what had happened. Medical examiners found signs of strangulation on Jessica's body, marks left by both hands and some kind of material, possibly a rope or a belt. She was also covered in bruises and scratches, and she had been sexually assaulted. According to experts, the trauma she endured could have caused a brain injury, which was only made worse by the fact that she had spent hours sitting inside a hot car under the scorching sun. This might explain her strange behavior, why she seemed disoriented and never called for help. Most likely, Jessica was so out of it that she didn't even realize what was happening to her, and in the end, she succumbed to her injuries. Toxicology reports backed up what her cousin had already said. There was no alcohol or drugs in her system. So, if just one of the witnesses had called for medical help, doctors might have had a chance to save Jessica. But now, it was too late, and detectives had to figure out who was responsible for her death. They focused on finding CCTV footage, but there were no cameras near the parking lot where Jessica had been found. Still, they figured out one thing. If she had bought dog food in the middle of the night, she had probably stopped at the 24-hour Walmart just across the street. Detectives obtained the store's security footage, and there she was, Jessica pulling into the parking lot and walking inside. She was alone and seemed completely fine. There were no signs that anything was wrong. She went straight to the pet food aisle, grabbed a large bag, and headed to the checkout. Everything looked normal, but then, as she walked out of the store, detectives noticed something interesting. Just a few seconds later, a man followed her outside. Reviewing more footage, detectives saw that the man had arrived at Walmart just minutes before Jessica. He parked at the far end of the lot and walked inside, but instead of going into the store, he headed straight to the restroom and then walked back out. Checking the entrance camera, detectives saw him walking directly behind Jessica, and he was definitely in a hurry. But then they hit a problem. Jessica's car was parked right behind a large tree, completely blocking the view from the cameras. Still, the footage was enough to track the man's movements. He walked toward Jessica's car, disappearing behind the tree, and never came back out. 2 minutes later, Jessica's car pulled out of the parking lot. Another camera later captured it arriving at the restaurant parking lot where she would be found the next morning. A little while later, someone stepped out of Jessica's car. This person walked across the lot, heading straight for Walmart's parking area, where he got in the same vehicle the suspicious man had arrived in earlier. At this point, detectives were almost certain this person was directly involved in Jessica's murder. But there was one problem. The surveillance footage was too poor to clearly identify him or his vehicle. Still, detectives weren't out of options. Since Jessica's credit cards were missing, they checked her accounts for any recent activity. And that's when they found a lead. One of her cards had been used at a gas station about 20 minutes after her car was left in the restaurant parking lot. Detectives pulled surveillance footage from the gas station and immediately spotted the red pickup truck their suspect had been driving. And when they checked the camera near the register, their suspicions were confirmed. It was the same man. Now they had proof that this person had Jessica's credit card, and that only made him look even more guilty. They released footage of the suspect and his vehicle to the news, asking the public for any information about this man. Meanwhile, detectives kept searching for more evidence, but they couldn't find any other leads. Days passed without any major breakthroughs, until they got a call from a woman named Leslie. She told them that the man in the footage looked a lot like her fiance's best friend, 29-year-old Crispin Harmel. But that wasn't all. According to Leslie, Crispin was supposed to stop by that evening to pay back the money he owed, but he never showed up. Later, when she saw the news report about Jessica's murder, she immediately recognized him in the surveillance footage. She couldn't believe he might be involved in something so horrific, but she still knew the right thing to do was call the police. Detectives began digging into Crispin's background and quickly uncovered an interesting detail. Just weeks before Jessica's murder, a patrol officer had pulled him over for driving with an expired license. When investigators reviewed the officer's body camera footage, they confirmed that Crispin closely resembled their suspect. Even more telling, he was wearing the exact same baseball cap as the man in the surveillance footage. 5 days after Jessica's murder, police went to Crispin's home. Right away, they noticed his pickup truck. It was the same model as the one caught on camera, but something was off. It looked like Crispin had made some cosmetic changes. Chrome details that had been visible in the footage were now painted over in black. When detectives knocked on his door, Crispin surprised them right away. Without hesitation, he admitted that he had met with Jessica that night. According to him, they connected through an adult website and had arranged to meet for a no-strings-attached hookup. Crispin claimed they met in the Walmart parking lot, where he got into Jessica's car. According to him, she then drove them to a park, where they had consensual sex before she dropped him back off at Walmart. Before he left, they sat in her car and talked for a while. He told her he was struggling financially, and according to his version of events, Jessica gave him her credit card so he could pay for gas. Then, they said their goodbyes and went their separate ways. The next day, when he saw news reports about Jessica's murder, Crispin said he panicked. Afraid he would be accused, he threw away the credit card and repainted parts of his truck. Even though Crispin told this story with confidence, detectives knew it was nothing but a lie. It looked like a desperate attempt to avoid responsibility. The surveillance footage alone was enough to tear his version apart. He claimed they had arranged to meet in the Walmart parking lot, yet he never approached Jessica until after she returned to her car. Then, he said she had driven him back after their supposed encounter. But the cameras told a different story. They clearly showed him walking back to his own truck alone. Jessica's car never moved from the parking lot until the next morning, and no one else had approached it. Detectives seized Crispin's phone and computer, along with Jessica's devices. As they suspected, there was no trace of any communication between them. No messages, no calls, nothing. In fact, Jessica had never even visited the adult website Crispin claimed they had used to arrange the meeting. But when investigators dug through Crispin's computer, they found something interesting. Just hours after police discovered Jessica's body, he had searched for and read multiple news articles about her murder. Jessica's friends and family didn't believe his story either. According to them, she wasn't the kind of person who would go looking for a one-night stand, let alone meet a total stranger in a parking lot in the middle of the night. That just wasn't who she was. On top of that, she had already told her friends she needed to get some sleep before her morning shift and that she still had to feed her dogs. There was no way she would have gone out for some secret late-night date. Investigators believed Crispin was doing everything he could to shift the blame, but with so much evidence stacked against him, there was no way he could come up with a believable excuse. Based on the surveillance footage, detectives pieced together what they believed really happened. Crispin likely spotted Jessica inside Walmart and targeted her. He followed her to her car, got in, and used threats to keep her from screaming or fighting back. From there, he may have forced her to drive to a nearby park, where he assaulted her before returning to the parking lot near Walmart, closer to his own truck. Before leaving, he strangled her and stole her wallet and credit cards. When police confronted Crispin with this version of events, he stopped answering questions and asked for a lawyer. Despite the strong evidence against Crispin, investigators faced a serious challenge, one that could put the entire case at risk. The fact that Jessica had remained alive for several hours after the attack created a major legal hurdle. The problem was that medical experts couldn't say with absolute certainty why this had happened. Cases like hers were so rare that medical science simply hadn't studied them in enough depth. As we know, the official cause of death was listed as strangulation. But until that point, there had never been a single documented case of someone being strangled, surviving for hours while walking and talking, and then dying later as a direct result of this attack. Because multiple witnesses had seen Jessica alive, the prosecutor wasn't confident that a jury would return a guilty verdict. The only thing that could truly seal the case was a confession, but Crispin refused to admit to anything. Detectives found themselves in an incredibly difficult situation. They were certain that Crispin was responsible for Jessica's murder. No one else could have physically committed the crime, but because she had remained alive until the morning, there was a real risk that the case would fall apart in court. Hoping to strengthen their case, investigators searched Jessica's car for any additional evidence, but they came up empty. There were no fingerprints, no DNA, nothing that could directly tie Crispin to the crime scene. Still, prosecutors found a temporary solution. They charged him with evidence tampering in connection with Jessica's case. As we know, Crispin had admitted to throwing away her credit card and repainting his truck, both clear attempts to cover his tracks. Since they had his own words as proof, they at least had enough to hold him accountable for some crime while they continued working to build a stronger case. In May 2010, Crispin pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 10 years in prison for evidence tampering. But detectives had no intention of giving up. They were determined to get full justice for Jessica, and to do that, they needed solid scientific proof directly linking Crispin to her murder. For years, they kept searching without any progress. But then, in 2013, they came across a scientific article that changed everything. This article described cases where strangulation didn't immediately result in death, as it typically would. Instead, it triggered something known as delayed death syndrome, a condition where victims suffer brain damage that causes confusion, disorientation, and an inability to seek help. Everything in the article perfectly matched Jessica's behavior after the attack. It also supported the initial medical examiner's conclusion that she had likely suffered a brain injury, which left her unaware of her condition until it was too late. Detectives immediately contacted the author of this article and started building a murder case against Crispin, this time backed by cutting-edge medical science. In May 2014, Crispin was officially arrested for murder, but he continued to insist on his innocence. During the trial, his defense attorney focused on one key point. There was no DNA evidence linking Crispin to the crime. The prosecution had argued that Jessica had fought back during the attack and likely scratched her attacker, which should have left traces of DNA under her fingernails. However, forensic experts for the prosecution pointed out a crucial factor. Jessica had spent hours inside her car, trapped in extreme heat. At such high temperatures, DNA degrades rapidly, and by the time her body was examined, any genetic material under her nails would have already broken down beyond the point of recovery. In addition to the forensic evidence, prosecutors relied heavily on the overwhelming amount of surveillance footage, which clearly pointed to Crispin's guilt. But then, something unexpected happened. Crispin's lawyer questioned the accuracy of the video timestamps used by the prosecution. See, when investigators first got the footage straight from the security cameras, there were no timestamps on it. Since the exact timing of events was crucial to the case, prosecutors used specialized software to add them later. And that single detail gave the defense an opening to cast doubt on the evidence. Crispin's attorney argued that this was a serious violation because he had never been given copies of the surveillance footage with the added timestamps. In the end, the judge sided with the defense and was forced to declare a mistrial. Just like that, Crispin once again escaped conviction, all because of a technicality. However, he remained in prison, continuing to serve his 10-year sentence for evidence tampering. Meanwhile, prosecutors immediately began preparing for a new trial. Over the next few years, Crispin's legal team fought hard to prevent him from being retried, arguing that another trial would violate his rights. But in the end, a higher court ruled in favor of the prosecution, clearing the way for justice to finally be served. The new trial began in 2018, and this time, the prosecution made sure to cover every detail, leaving no room for the defense to exploit any technicalities. In the end, they succeeded in convincing the jury of Crispin's guilt, and he was finally convicted of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Prosecutors had chosen not to pursue the death penalty, fearing it might weaken their chances of securing a guilty verdict. They knew the delayed death syndrome argument could still plant doubts in the jurors' minds. And in death penalty cases, a conviction requires absolute certainty. A few years later, Crispin tried to appeal his sentence, but his request was denied. As a result, he remains behind bars with almost no chance of ever walking free. Jessica's family thanked investigators and prosecutors for their relentless pursuit of justice, even though it took 9 long years to reach a verdict. However, they also admitted that before the sentencing, they had hoped it might bring them some relief and closure. But in reality, no punishment for Crispin could ever truly ease their pain. Ashley Mead was born on November 14, 1991, in the small town of Warren, Pennsylvania. She grew up in a big family, surrounded by siblings. From an early age, Ashley had a deep love for all things creative. She was passionate about singing, poetry, and fashion. She was also a huge nature lover and always dreamed of traveling. Over the years, she explored almost every state in the US and even visited Canada and Mexico. After finishing high school, Ashley moved to New York to study liberal arts. Later, she transferred to Louisiana State University in Shreveport. That's where she met a guy named Adam, and the two started dating. For the next few years, Ashley stayed focused on her studies until her life took a sudden, devastating turn. She was in a serious car accident, which led to a long and difficult recovery. And even though she eventually managed to get back to her normal life, she now had a new problem: medical bills. The debt piled up during her treatment, and she had no choice but to drop out of school and start working full-time. Around that same time, things between her and Adam started falling apart. Eventually, the two decided to break up, but almost immediately after that, Ashley found out that she was pregnant. Despite everything she had been through in the past few years, she was overjoyed and couldn't wait to become a mom. She also wanted her child to grow up in a two-parent home, so she and Adam agreed to co-parent their daughter. By then, Adam had moved to Boulder, Colorado to study culinary arts and become a chef, and Ashley decided to follow him there. Ashley and Adam rented an apartment in a small residential complex, and before long, their daughter, Winter Daisy, was born. Even though they had decided not to get back together, they were both completely devoted to their little girl, sharing the responsibilities of raising her and giving her all their love. A few months after Winter was born, Ashley got a job as a teaching assistant at a preschool. Later, she joined an organization that helped children from low-income families get ready for school. The work was tough, but Ashley had a natural way with kids. They loved her from the start. This continued until February 2017. By then, Ashley was 25 years old, raising her one-year-old daughter and working with kids. But on February 13th, she didn't show up for her shift. Her coworkers found it odd. They tried calling and texting her, but she never responded. The next day, when she missed work again, one of her colleagues decided to contact the police. She asked them to check on Ashley and her daughter to make sure that they were okay. The local police department sent officers to her apartment complex. As soon as they got there, they noticed a few strange things. The outdoor lights near the entrance were on, even though it was the middle of the day. The front door was unlocked, so the officers stepped inside. But there was no sign of Ashley, her daughter, or Adam. As they looked around, more red flags popped up. Ashley's belongings, her phone, driver's license, and purse were still inside. Yet her car was missing from the parking lot, which didn't make sense. Then, in the kitchen, they found something even more unsettling: a half-cooked meal left in the oven, as if someone had started making dinner but, for some reason, never finished, and never came back. All of this seemed suspicious, so the police decided to contact Ashley's parents. Her mother told them she hadn't heard from Ashley in days and had no idea where she might have gone. She also found it strange that Ashley had left her cat behind, something she never did. According to her mom, Ashley always took the cat with her wherever she traveled, no matter where she went. Desperate for answers, her mother started reaching out to family and friends, hoping someone had heard from Ashley. But no one had spoken to her in days. Meanwhile, the police tried calling Adam, but he wasn't answering either. And when investigators attempted to track his phone, they made another unsettling discovery: it had been turned off. As for Ashley's phone, the police handed it over to the experts, and they quickly uncovered several important clues. The data showed that the last time Ashley used her phone was on February 12th, 2 days before her coworker reported her missing. It was her day off, and she had spent it running errands with her daughter. She visited a few stores, picked out a new dress, and snapped some photos before heading home. After speaking with Ashley's neighbors, detectives were able to piece together more details about that evening. One neighbor recalled seeing her taking out the trash around 6 p.m. Then, sometime before 9 p.m., another neighbor heard a loud, heavy thud coming from Ashley's apartment. She thought it sounded like someone falling down the stairs. But after that, everything went silent, and she didn't hear anything else. This detail caught the investigators' attention, especially since Ashley's phone activity had stopped right around 9 p.m. That made them suspect something bad might have happened to her at that exact moment. Soon, they got another lead. Data from her phone revealed that, shortly before her disappearance, Ashley had started dating a man named Harvey. Detectives went through their messages and found something interesting. His text gave off a suspicious vibe, and that was enough for police to want to talk to him in person. When officers showed up at Harvey's house, he allowed them to search the place without a warrant. He insisted he had no idea where Ashley was and claimed he hadn't spoken to her in days. According to him, on the night she vanished, he was hanging out with friends, and his alibi checked out. They all confirmed his story. Harvey even let the police go through his phone, and the data backed up his claims. So for now, he didn't seem to be involved. With Harvey ruled out as a suspect, detectives kept searching for new leads. Since they still hadn't found any trace of Ashley, they decided to take a different approach, tracking down Adam's relatives in hopes of locating him. And that's when they finally caught a break. When investigators contacted Adam's parents in Louisiana, they revealed something interesting. Adam had stopped by their house just a day earlier, on February 13th. According to his parents, Adam had arrived with his daughter, but without Ashley. They were completely caught off guard by his visit, especially since he hadn't told anyone he was coming. That alone seemed odd, considering the drive from Colorado to Louisiana was almost 1,000 miles. But Adam had a simple explanation. He claimed he had been planning the trip for a while so that his daughter could spend time with her relatives. Despite the surprise, his family was happy to see them. Adam stayed the night, and the next day, he left for Arkansas to visit his grandmother. Detectives asked his relatives to reach out and tell him to call the police right away because they needed to know where Ashley was. At first, Adam didn't pick up their calls, but eventually he turned on his phone and contacted the detectives. Adam told them he had no idea where Ashley was and claimed he had been trying to reach her the entire time, but she never answered his calls or texts. According to his story, on the evening of February 12th, they got into a serious argument, one that turned physical. He admitted that he had hit her. After that, he decided to leave the house for a while to avoid escalating the situation any further, and he took Winter with him. He also admitted to taking Ashley's car, saying he didn't have one of his own. At that point in the conversation, Adam revealed that he had already left Louisiana and was driving through Oklahoma. Adam's story didn't sit right with the detectives. The more they thought about it, the more they suspected he might have played a direct role in Ashley's disappearance. But since he was in another state, they couldn't just bring him in for questioning. Then, they noticed a critical detail. Adam wasn't listed on Winter's birth certificate. Legally, that meant he had no right to take her out of state without Ashley's permission. So detectives used this to their advantage. They contacted police in Oklahoma and asked them to detain him. A few hours later, patrol officers spotted Ashley's car on the road. Adam was taken into custody, and thankfully, Winter was found safe with him. While detectives prepared for his interrogation, forensic experts searched the car, and what they found was deeply unsettling. Under one of the back seats, they discovered traces of blood. When they ran a DNA test, the results confirmed it belonged to Ashley. For the first time, investigators had physical evidence suggesting that Ashley might no longer be alive. But they still had no idea what had actually happened to her. That was about to change though, because another clue was just around the corner. Soon after speaking with Adam's parents, detectives received an unexpected call from his younger sister. She told them that she hadn't been able to see Adam and Winter the day they arrived. Instead, she stopped by their parents' house the following morning. By that time, their parents had already left for work, and Adam was supposed to be getting ready for his trip to another state. But the moment she walked in, his reaction caught her off guard. He looked genuinely shocked to see her. He seemed extremely nervous, and something about his behavior felt off. Then, she noticed something strange. Cleaning supplies were scattered everywhere, and it looked like Adam had been scrubbing something in the guest bedroom. When she asked him what was going on, he gave her a bizarre explanation. He claimed he had suddenly felt sick and thrown up on the floor, so he was just trying to clean it up before leaving. She offered to help, but Adam immediately refused. Instead, he rushed her out of the house. Detectives wasted no time. They headed straight to Louisiana and began searching the house with a team of forensic experts. And what they found was horrifying. In the guest bedroom, where Adam had been cleaning when his sister walked in, investigators discovered multiple traces of blood. But that wasn't all. In the backyard shed, they found an electric saw and a barbecue lid, both covered in blood. When the evidence was sent to the lab, the results confirmed what detectives had already suspected. The blood belonged to Ashley. At this point, it was clear she hadn't simply disappeared. Something terrible had happened to her, but there was still so many unanswered questions. If Adam had killed her in Colorado, why would he transport her body more than 1,000 miles away? And what did he do with it after leaving his parents' house? As detectives prepared to confront Adam with all these questions, the case took another unexpected turn. That same day, February 15th, police in a small town in Oklahoma reached out with disturbing news. Earlier that morning, a gas station employee went outside to take out the trash when she noticed a suitcase sitting near the dumpster. It looked brand new, which struck her as odd. Why would someone throw it away? Curiosity got the best of her, and she decided to take a look inside. But the moment she unzipped it, she immediately regretted it. Inside were human remains. When police officers arrived, they confirmed that the suitcase contained a human torso. The remains were sent to a lab for DNA testing, but at first, investigators had no way of identifying the victim. Then, word began to spread about Ashley's disappearance. Oklahoma detectives connected the dots and reached out to their colleagues working on her case. They shared the DNA sample from the torso, and it was a match. Investigators requested surveillance footage from the gas station, specifically the cameras covering the dumpster area. What they found was exactly what they expected: footage of Ashley's car pulling up. Adam stepped out, carrying the very same suitcase, and left it next to the dumpsters before driving away. With this, detectives were finally able to piece together a chilling timeline of what likely happened to Ashley. Based on all the evidence, they believed Adam had killed her on the night of February 12th while they were at home. After that, he came up with a plan. Visiting his relatives would give him the perfect cover to get rid of her remains in multiple states, making it harder for police to track them down. Since Ashley's blood had been found inside his parents' house, detectives suspected Adam had transported her body there. He waited until his parents left for work, then used their electric saw to dismember her remains. After that, he hit the road, dumping pieces of her body along the way. This realization made one thing painfully clear: Adam could have stopped anywhere along his route, which stretched for hundreds of miles. That made the search for the rest of Ashley's remains incredibly difficult, but detectives weren't ready to give up. They carefully reconstructed Adam's travel path, tracing his journey from his parents' house to the spot where he was arrested. Their goal was to find more surveillance footage that might show him disposing of additional remains. Eventually, they found what they were looking for: CCTV footage from a gas station in the small town of Morrilton, Arkansas. The video showed Adam throwing something into a dumpster, but there was a major problem. By the time investigators discovered this, the dumpster's contents had already been taken to a landfill. Determined to recover whatever he had discarded, police launched a massive search effort. More than 40 people were sent to comb through the landfill, but despite their best efforts, they found nothing. Even though Adam's guilt seemed almost undeniable, the fact that parts of Ashley's body were still missing posed a serious challenge. Without a full body, medical examiners couldn't determine her exact cause of death. The torso showed some cuts and abrasions, but these injuries had been sustained while she was still alive, likely as she fought back against her attacker that night. As for Adam, he stuck to his story. Even when detectives laid out all the evidence in front of him, he refused to confess. He insisted that he and Ashley had argued, and he had simply left with their daughter, that she had been alive when he last saw her. But with the overwhelming amount of physical evidence against him, detectives didn't need a confession. They arrested Adam and charged him with murder. As prosecutors built their case, they uncovered another damning piece of evidence: Adam's personal journal. Inside, he had written about wanting to kill Ashley long before it actually happened. His journal revealed deep resentment. He believed she was only staying with him for the sake of their daughter. And in a way, he wasn't wrong. Ashley really was living with him just for winter, but that had been their mutual agreement from the start. Still, Adam had wanted more from their relationship, while Ashley didn't feel the same way. At the same time, he wrote extensively about how much he loved his daughter, and how terrified he was that Ashley might take her away from him. According to the prosecution, this was the breaking point for Adam. They believed he was jealous that Ashley had started seeing someone new, even though their own relationship had ended nearly 2 years earlier. More than anything, he feared she might leave him for good, taking their daughter with her. That, they argued, was what pushed him to commit murder. And, in a desperate attempt to cover his tracks, Adam tried to make it look like Ashley had simply vanished. He even called and texted her after killing her, pretending to be worried, as if he had no idea where she had gone. Before the trial began, it was revealed that Adam had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and PTSD from his time in the military. But that didn't change a thing. He was still found guilty and held accountable for his actions. In April 2018, a jury unanimously found him guilty of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison, plus an additional 12 years. Adam later tried to appeal the verdict, but his request was denied. To this day, he remains behind bars and still refuses to reveal where he disposed of the rest of Ashley's remains. One final detail I want to mention. After Adam's arrest, Winter was placed in the custody of Child Protective Services, despite both sides of the family wanting to take her in. What happened to her after that remains unknown, as authorities have kept this information private due to her age. So, all that's left is to hope she was eventually placed with relatives and not left in the foster care system. Shannon Christian was born on April 29, 1985 in Texas. When she was 12, her family moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, where she settled in with her parents and older brother. Shannon was the kind of person who made friends instantly. Outgoing, friendly, always ready to help. She fit right into her new school like she'd always been there. People who knew her said she could connect with just about anyone, that warmth and kindness played a big part in her future plans. Shannon wanted to do something meaningful, something that would help others. So after high school, she enrolled at the University of Tennessee to study sociology. Another reason she chose that school was because she wanted to stay close to home. Shannon was incredibly close to her family, and staying nearby just felt right. But she was also determined to be independent, so she picked up 2 part-time jobs to support herself. While she was at college, she met a guy named Chris Newsom. They hit it off and started dating. At the time, Shannon was 21 and Chris was 23. He worked as a carpenter, and even though he was still young, he had already built a solid reputation for himself around town. On January 6, 2007, Shannon and Chris were planning to go to a friend's birthday party. That afternoon, Shannon went over to her friend's house, where Chris was supposed to pick her up a bit later. He was running a little behind, so Shannon's friend ended up heading to the party without her, and Shannon decided to stay at the house and wait for Chris to show up. Before picking up Shannon, Chris had dropped off another friend at the same party and headed straight to get his girlfriend. But about an hour later, people at the party started to worry. Shannon was only about a 10-minute drive away, but neither she nor Chris had arrived. It just didn't make sense. At first, their friends figured maybe their plans had changed, but something about that didn't sit right. It wasn't like them to just skip out on a close friend's birthday without saying anything. After waiting a while longer, they tried calling both of them, but neither one answered. By the time midnight rolled around, their concern had reached its peak. So, a few of them decided to drive over to the apartment complex where Shannon had been waiting. When they got to the parking lot, they saw Chris's truck, but Shannon's car, the one she had driven earlier, was nowhere to be found. So their friends assumed the couple had just decided to skip the party without telling anyone and headed back to celebrate. A bit earlier, Shannon had called her mom and said she'd be home later than expected. She and Chris had decided to spend the evening together, maybe grab something to eat and watch a movie. She told her mom she'd be back around 3:30 in the morning, but that time came and went, and Shannon never showed up. At first, her mom figured she might have stayed the night at a friend's or maybe at Chris's place, so she didn't panic right away. But the next morning, she got a call that changed everything. Shannon's boss said she hadn't shown up for work. Shannon's mom got in touch with Chris's parents and found out that he hadn't come home the night before either. Neither of them were answering their phones, and now both families were seriously worried. Their friends couldn't reach them either. The whole thing felt off. Sure, Shannon and Chris were adults, but they always kept in touch with their parents. They had never just disappeared overnight without saying anything, and Shannon took her job seriously. There was no way she'd miss a shift without a good reason. Their family started calling every hospital in the area, but no one matching their descriptions had been admitted anywhere. So they turned to the police for help, but the local department refused to open a case, saying that since both Shannon and Chris were adults, the families would have to wait 24 hours before filing a missing persons report. But Shannon's family wasn't just gonna sit around and wait. Her parents reached out to her phone company, hoping that they could help. And surprisingly, they agreed to trace her phone. They said that during the night, Shannon had checked her voicemail 3 times, and that was the last time her phone showed any activity before it turned off. The last signal had pinged off a cell tower near North Cherry Street. That only made her parents more anxious. Knoxville was generally a safe city, but that particular area was known for high crime. It didn't make any sense. Why would Shannon be there? Determined to find answers, her family started searching the neighborhood themselves. After hours of driving around, they finally spotted her car. It was parked just a couple of blocks away from where her phone had last pinged. As soon as Shannon's family got to the car, they knew something was wrong. All of her belongings were missing. Photos, her phone charger, everything she normally kept with her. The interior of the car was dirty, which was totally unlike her. Shannon always kept her car spotless. Even more unsettling, the driver's seat had been pushed all the way back, suggesting someone much taller had been behind the wheel. Clearly, Shannon hadn't been the one driving. After this unsettling discovery, her parents called the police again, and this time, officers finally took action. When they arrived at the scene, they noticed something deeply disturbing. The car's interior and door handles had been wiped down, like someone was trying to erase fingerprints. And there was one more thing that didn't sit right: a crumpled, empty pack of cigarettes inside the car. The problem was, neither Shannon nor Chris smoked. All signs pointed to the car possibly being stolen, but investigators still had no clue where Shannon or Chris were. Then, while searching the car, they finally found something that gave them a real lead: an envelope wedged between the seats. It had the address of a house, located right there in the same neighborhood. Even more telling, forensics found a fingerprint on the envelope, and it didn't take long to get a match. The print belonged to a man named LaMarcus Davidson, a convicted felon with a long rap sheet. And as it turned out, he lived at the very address written on the envelope. Detectives headed straight to the house, but no one was there. Still, they had reason to believe Shannon and Chris might be in immediate danger, and that gave them legal grounds to enter without a warrant. The inside of the house was a mess, but police immediately spotted Shannon's purse, her shoes, and a few other personal items. They also found Chris's baseball cap and his driver's license. But the most horrifying discovery was waiting for them in the kitchen. When one of the officers lifted the lid of the trash can, he found something wrapped in a piece of cloth. Underneath it was a human body. It was Shannon. The case was immediately reclassified as a homicide investigation. Her body was sent to the medical examiner, and detectives were now focused on 2 urgent questions: where was Chris, and where was LaMarcus Davidson? And they didn't have to wait long for one of those answers. Right after Shannon's body was found, police got word from another department. Nearly 2 days earlier, a railroad employee had discovered the body of an unidentified man near the train tracks. At the time, no one had been able to identify him, but now detectives suspected it might be Chris. And soon, a DNA test confirmed their worst fears. The examination of Shannon and Chris's bodies revealed a truly horrifying picture. They both had numerous injuries, cuts, bruises, and signs of abuse. It was also clear that they both had been sexually assaulted. Chris died from multiple gunshot wounds, while Shannon's cause of death was determined to be suffocation. Forensic experts found biological evidence on Shannon's body that matched LaMarcus Davidson. His fingerprints were also discovered on the trash bags used to wrap her remains. And if that wasn't enough, investigators also found spent shell casings inside Davidson's house. Those casings matched the bullets that were recovered from Chris's body. With all of this evidence, police had no doubt that LaMarcus was directly involved in the murders, so they focused all their efforts on finding him. Detectives pulled his cell phone records and discovered that over the past couple of days, LaMarcus had been in frequent contact with a man named Eric. It didn't take long for police to track Eric down. At first, he claimed he didn't know where LaMarcus was, But as soon as investigators explained what LaMarcus was suspected of and that Eric himself could be charged as an accomplice, he quickly changed his mind and gave up the address. According to Eric, LaMarcus had been hiding out in an empty house that was up for sale. He also admitted that on the very same day Shannon and Chris disappeared, they both had robbed it. Police headed to the house, and sure enough, they found LaMarcus there. He was surrounded by trash and empty food containers, and he had a gun with him. But one detail stood out even more. He was wearing Chris's sneakers. Officers took him in for questioning, and from the very beginning, he denied any involvement. Then, he started changing his story again and again. In total, LaMarcus gave investigators 5 completely different versions of what happened, each one contradicting the last. At first, he claimed he had no idea what anyone was talking about. Then, he said Shannon and Chris had been kidnapped by someone else, and he had nothing to do with it. Later, he told detectives he'd just used the victim's car to drive around and sell drugs. In the end, LaMarcus never confessed, but he did give police a few useful pieces of information. Based on what he said, it was becoming clear that more than one person might have been involved in the murders. And detectives agreed that theory made the most sense. According to LaMarcus, the real killers were his half-brother, Latalvis, and their mutual friend, George. Detectives quickly tracked both men down and brought them in for questioning, along with Eric, who was now also being treated as an accomplice. None of them were in a hurry to confess, but during the interrogations, police uncovered something interesting. They concluded that all 4 men had likely played some role in the crime, and they weren't alone. There was a 5th person involved, an 18-year-old woman named Vanessa. Detectives located her and took her into custody as well. With all 5 suspects now under arrest, the questioning continued. Eventually, they all started turning on each other, pointing fingers and telling stories that shifted the blame away from themselves. But even with their conflicting accounts, the growing pile of evidence helped detectives piece together a picture of what really happened that night. Based on everything investigators gathered, LaMarcus seemed to be the ringleader of the group. He was mainly involved in selling drugs, and that night, he planned to steal a car to use for deliveries. He brought along 3 accomplices, plus Vanessa, and they went out looking for the right vehicle. As they were driving through a residential complex, the same one where Shannon was waiting, they spotted her car. She was sitting inside, and Chris was standing next to it. That's when they decided not just to steal the vehicle, but to abduct the couple as well. They forced Shannon and Chris into the car at gunpoint and drove them to LaMarcus's house. According to DNA evidence, both LaMarcus and Latalvis sexually assaulted the victims, and the abuse went on for hours. On top of that, they subjected the couple to other forms of torture and humiliation. By early morning, the attackers led Chris out of the house and took him to the railroad tracks, where they shot him multiple times and left his body there. Then, they returned to the house and continued tormenting Shannon. She remained alive for nearly 2 full days. During that time, her friends and family had already started searching for her, though her car hadn't been found yet. Eventually, they killed her too. Her body was stuffed into a trash can and left inside the house. Investigators also learned that LaMarcus didn't just steal Chris's sneakers. He also took his phone and some of Shannon's personal items, which he later gave to his girlfriend as gifts. As for Vanessa, she insisted that she was a victim too, that she had been at the house against her will. But police found a diary in her home that completely contradicted her story. In it, Vanessa described the day as a wild adventure and wrote that she genuinely enjoyed the experience. In the end, all of the suspects were hit with long lists of charges, and the prosecution began preparing for trial. It took more than 2 years to get everything ready, and during that time, the defense attorneys managed to have the trial moved to a different county. The reason was simple. The case had caused a massive public outcry in Knoxville. People were horrified by what had been done to this young couple, and the defense argued there was no way their clients could get a fair trial in that city. Eventually, the court agreed, and the venue was changed. The first to go on trial was Eric. Throughout the investigation, police were never able to find solid proof that he had directly taken part in the murders, but they did uncover enough evidence to show that he knew what was going on. In the end, he received the maximum sentence for the charges against him, 18 years in prison. Next came the trials of Lamarcus, Latalvis, and George. In a desperate attempt to defend them, their attorney claimed that Shannon and Chris had willingly participated in the horrific abuse they were subjected to. The jury, of course, didn't buy that ridiculous story for a second, and all three men were found guilty. Lamarcus was sentenced to death, while Latalvis and George received life in prison. Vanessa's case was a bit more complicated. At first, she had been granted immunity in exchange for testifying against the others, but the court later ruled that her immunity only applied to the carjacking charges, not to the charges related to the murder and sexual assault. So, Vanessa did end up facing trial, and eventually she was convicted and sentenced to 53 years in prison. In the end, all those responsible were brought to justice, but not long after the verdicts were handed down, the case took a surprising turn. In 2011, the judge who had presided over all 5 trials resigned amidst a scandal. It came to light that he had been having an affair with a court employee and had also been buying illegal drugs from criminals. Because of this, a higher court decided to review several of the sentences he had issued, including those of Lamarcus, Vanessa, George, and Latalvis. The news sparked outrage, and understandably so. In the end, prosecutors were able to successfully challenge the decisions involving Lamarcus and Latalvis, meaning their original sentences stood. But the other two, Vanessa and George, were granted new trials. Vanessa was once again found guilty of the same charges, but this time she received a reduced sentence of 35 years instead of 53. George also got a lighter sentence, which made him eligible for parole after serving 51 years. Still, the retrials of Vanessa and George ended up having consequences in the other direction too. During those new proceedings, the prosecution gathered a significant amount of new evidence that suggested Eric had, in fact, taken an active part in the abuse and murders. In 2019, he was hit with new charges. This time, he was sentenced to life in prison, plus an additional 90 years. Considering that his original sentence was just 18 years, this new ruling all but erased any chance he had of ever being released. Vanessa, on the other hand, became eligible for parole after serving just 7 years. But so far, all of her requests have been denied, and she remains behind bars. In the end, despite all the setbacks, those responsible for the murders of Shannon and Chris were held accountable and received serious prison time, though many still believe every one of them deserved the death penalty. This crime didn't just shake Knoxville. It sent shockwaves across the entire country. People struggled to comprehend how anyone could be capable of something so cruel and inhuman. The house where it all happened was eventually bought by a local company. It was torn down, and in its place, a memorial was built to honor Shannon and Chris. The University of Tennessee also established scholarships in their names, ones that are still active today. And finally, it's worth noting that Lamarcus's death sentence has yet to be carried out. Nearly 20 years after the murders, he's still sitting on death row. Lisa Mitchell was born on August 5, 1983, in Calgary, Canada. From an early age, she had a real love for anything creative. When she was just 4, she got into drawing, and that passion stuck with her as she got older. In high school, she also discovered a love for music and even started a band with a few of her friends. After graduation, Lisa decided to hold off on college. She needed to work and support herself, so she bounced between a few part-time jobs. While working at a restaurant, she met a man named Alan. The two started dating, and a few years later, they had 2 kids, a boy and a girl. Eventually, they moved into their own home in a quiet neighborhood and focused on raising their family. This went on until October 2012. On the 27th, Lisa, who was 29 at the time, headed to her evening shift at a hotel where she worked alongside her mom. That night, the hotel was hosting a Halloween-themed party, and Lisa and her mom had a great time working the event together. After her shift, Lisa decided to spend the night at her mom's place, since the drive back to her own house was pretty long. The next morning, they chatted about the party and talked over their plans for the week, when suddenly, Lisa's phone rang. After a quick call, she told her mom she had to head home right away. She said goodbye, got in her car, and left. Her mom thought it was a little odd, but didn't dwell on it at the time. However, over the next few days, that feeling of unease started to grow because Lisa never called her back. And that just wasn't like her. Lisa usually checked in with her mom a few times a week, no matter what. Her mom tried calling, but Lisa didn't pick up. At first, she figured Lisa was probably just busy, but as the days passed and there was still no word, she started to feel like something wasn't right. Eventually, she decided to drive over to Lisa's house to make sure everything was okay, but Lisa wasn't there. Instead, she was met by Alan, who told her he had no idea where Lisa was either. According to him, the day after she left her mom's, October 28th, they had gotten into an argument. He said he went out to buy cigarettes, and when he came back, Lisa was gone. But something about that story didn't sit right with Lisa's mom. She couldn't imagine her daughter just leaving without saying a word, and especially abandoning her kids. Then, she noticed something strange. While talking to Alan in the hallway, she saw Lisa's winter coat and boots still in the closet. And since it was cold outside, there was no way Lisa would have gone anywhere without them. That's when she decided to look around the rest of the house. Inside, she found Lisa's favorite bracelet and necklace, the one she always wore whenever she left home. Her purse, on the other hand, was nowhere to be found. Before she left, Alan mentioned one more thing. He said Lisa had sent him an email and suggested her mom check her inbox too. When she got home, she turned on the computer, and sure enough, there was a message from Lisa. In it, Lisa said she was just feeling tired and needed to get away for a while. As strange as it all seemed, the messages that followed kept reassuring her that everything was okay. They kept exchanging emails over the next few weeks, but no matter how many times her mom asked, Lisa never explained why she suddenly left, or where she was. On November 16th, Lisa's mom woke up to find a missed call from her daughter. It had come in at 2:45 in the morning and went to voicemail. At first, she felt a wave of relief just hearing Lisa's voice. But as she listened to the actual message, that relief quickly turned into concern. Something about it felt off, and the more she replayed it, the less sense it seemed to make. Lisa said, "Hey, I'm okay. Sometimes my weeks get crazy, you know, and it was quiet for a while, and then all of a sudden this happened, and within half a day I should, but he's back now and I gotta go. Love you." None of it made any sense. Who was she talking about? What had happened? The message only raised more questions. That's when Lisa's mom realized she couldn't just wait around any longer. She decided it was time to go to the police. She told them everything that had been going on, and investigators started a search for Lisa. After speaking with her mom, they learned that Lisa and Alan's relationship had been rocky from the beginning. Even before their kids were born, the couple broke up and got back together more times than anyone could count. Things settled down a bit after they had children, but eventually, new problems started to surface. Lisa was frustrated that Alan had never managed to hold down a steady job. He bounced from one gig to another and sometimes didn't work at all. That left Lisa to support the family on her own, juggling 2 full-time jobs while also raising the kids. It all started to wear on her, and Lisa had begun thinking about ending the relationship. But in the end, she stayed for the sake of the children. When detectives brought Alan in for questioning, he admitted the relationship had been troubled. He said that in recent years, he and Lisa had agreed to stay together only for the sake of their kids. According to him, Lisa had been seeing other men from time to time, and he claimed he was fully aware of it. As for her disappearance, Alan said he had no idea where she might have gone. He added that he wasn't all that surprised she decided to leave, but what he couldn't understand was how she could just walk away and leave him alone with 2 kids. Police searched the house, but didn't find anything that pointed to what might have happened. Then, they checked Lisa's computer and found conversations with several men, which raised some eyebrows, since those men lived in other cities. Investigators started to wonder if maybe Lisa had gone to stay with one of them. But when they contacted them, each of the men said the same thing. they hadn't seen Lisa. Police also tried to trace the email address that had been sending messages to Lisa's mom, as well as the phone number that left the voicemail, but neither led anywhere. Over the following months, investigators kept searching for new leads and pushed Lisa's story out to the media, but there was still no sign of her. Lisa's mom eventually stopped receiving emails, and with each passing month, her hope of ever seeing her daughter again began to fade. Deep down, she suspected Alan might have had something to do with Lisa's disappearance, but every time she brought it up, police told her the same thing. There was no evidence linking him to the case. As for Alan, he continued raising the kids on his own and eventually landed a steady job with decent pay. He met a man who was opening a new car dealership, and the guy offered him a full-time position. Later on, that man's girlfriend started babysitting Alan's kids from time to time, which made things a little easier for him. Eventually, Alan started thinking about dating again, and not long after, he actually got the chance. One day, as he was leaving work, a woman accidentally rear-ended his car. She'd lost control due to the weather and told him her company would cover the repairs. As a friendly gesture, she also gave him a pair of hockey tickets. They stayed in touch after that, and Alan started thinking about the possibility of building something more with her. This went on for about 2 years. It seemed like Alan was moving on with his life, and there were still no updates, no signs, and no messages from Lisa. In early December 2014, 2 years after Lisa's disappearance, Alan went on a work trip to another city with 2 of his coworkers. While he was there, he got a call from the police. A detective introduced himself and said he'd just been assigned to Lisa's case. He told Alan he believed Lisa was no longer alive and that they had a warrant to search his house again. In fact, they were already on their way. At that moment, Alan was sitting with his coworkers, and according to them, his face went completely pale during the call. After hanging up, he asked for a cigarette and said he needed to talk to them. Alan said that 2 years earlier, he and Lisa had gotten into yet another argument. He couldn't even remember what started it, only that it escalated quickly. According to him, Lisa grabbed a kitchen knife and started threatening him. She allegedly said she could send him to the hospital, then call the cops and claimed he attacked her first, and he'd end up in prison. Alan claimed that what happened next was a blur. Somehow, he managed to grab the knife from her, then pushed her to the floor and started choking her. When he realized she was dead, panic set in. He didn't know what to do, but in the end, he decided to bury her body underneath the house and make it look like she had simply left. After finishing his story, Alan turned to one of his coworkers for advice. He knew this man had gone through something somewhat similar in the past. The coworker had told Alan that he once crashed his car while driving drunk, and his friend who was in the car with him died. To avoid taking the blame, he had moved his friend's body into the driver's seat. So now, Alan was looking to him for guidance. He started thinking through his options. He considered running away or trying to quickly hire a good lawyer who might be able to challenge the search warrant. At one point, he even floated the idea of going back to Calgary and burning the house down. But then he corrected himself, saying that a simple fire wouldn't be enough to destroy the evidence. He'd have to blow the whole place up. In the end, he realized he probably didn't have enough time to pull off any of those plans and decided that running was his best shot. His coworkers supported this idea, and Alan started thinking about where he could go. But there was one thing he hadn't accounted for. He wouldn't get the chance to carry out any of his plans. You see, that phone call from the detective wasn't just a heads up about a search warrant. In reality, it was the final step in a long, carefully planned police operation that had been in the works for over a year, all aimed at getting Alan to confess. Back in 2013, the province of Alberta had updated its laws regarding missing persons, giving law enforcement more tools to conduct investigations. Around that time, Lisa's case was handed off to a different department, and they immediately put those new tools to use. One of their first moves was digging deeper into the phone activity tied to the voicemail Lisa had left her mom. What they discovered was that the call came from a cheap, prepaid phone that had only been active for about a month after Lisa disappeared. During that time, it was used to make just 5 calls, 1 to Lisa's mom and 4 to Alan. The problem was, Alan had never once mentioned those calls to the police. What made things even more suspicious was the location of the phone activity. According to data from the cell provider, all 5 calls were made using a cell tower located near Lisa and Alan's home. And considering Lisa was supposedly long gone by then, that detail raised some serious red flags. That's when investigators started digging deeper into Alan's background. They pulled his financial records, and what they found was pretty disturbing. On the day Lisa disappeared, Alan had made a series of highly suspicious purchases: a large plastic tub, bleach, rubber gloves, cement, a big bucket, wooden boards, and cat litter. The last item stood out the most. Alan was severely allergic to cats, so there was no reason for him to be buying litter. Altogether, the purchases painted a grim picture. It looked like Alan had been preparing to get rid of a body. As for the phone Lisa supposedly used, detectives uncovered another clue: a purchase made with Alan's bank card at Walmart. The store had been selling the exact same model of prepaid phone used to make those 5 mysterious calls. But even with all of this, investigators still didn't have enough solid evidence to arrest Alan. They needed one of 2 things: either Lisa's body or a confession. So, they came up with a bold plan: an undercover operation designed to infiltrate Alan's life. It was given the codename Aurora. The first step was to send in an undercover female officer. She accidentally bumped into Alan's car, which led to a casual conversation and, over time, a friendly connection. A little while later, she introduced him to another undercover officer, a man posing as someone about to open a new car dealership. He offered Alan a job, and the 2 quickly became friends. To keep up the illusion, police even made sure the dealership was set up and operating, so Alan would have no reason to suspect anything. Police brought in several more undercover officers to join the operation, placing them at the same dealership to build trust with Alan. Over time, they all became part of his daily life. Even the woman who often babysat his kids, the girlfriend of his supposed coworker, turned out to be an undercover cop. As the months passed, Alan began to trust them. That's when detectives decided it was time to move into the final phase of the operation. They set up a fake work trip involving Alan and 2 of the undercover officers who had been posing as his colleagues. During that trip, the lead detective planned to call Alan and tell him they were about to search his house, and that they believed Lisa's body was hidden there. The goal was simple: catch Alan off guard, make him panic, and hopefully get him to confess to the people he now saw as friends. And the plan worked almost perfectly. Both undercover officers who were traveling with Alan were wearing hidden recording devices, and they captured his full confession on tape. Shortly after Alan confessed to the undercover officers, he was arrested and brought back to Calgary. Meanwhile, investigators headed to his house to carry out the search. It's worth noting that police had actually searched the property 2 years earlier, including the basement, but nothing had seemed out of place at the time. This time, however, detectives had a clearer idea of what Alan might have done with Lisa's body, thanks to the list of suspicious purchases. So, they combed through the basement much more carefully. In one corner, they spotted a strange cemented-over platform. It looked out of place, and its height matched exactly the wooden board Alan had bought 2 years earlier. Officers began taking the structure apart, and it didn't take long before they uncovered a hidden space underneath. Inside was a large plastic tub, filled with salt and cat litter, and sure enough, inside that tub was the body of Lisa Mitchell. Even though Lisa's body had been hidden for 2 full years, Alan's attempt to preserve and conceal it ended up working against him. The way he stored the remains actually helped preserve them well enough for the medical examiner to determine a cause of death. Just as Alan had said in his confession, it was strangulation. And while police now had everything they needed to formally charge him, they also uncovered something else. When they went through Alan's computer, they found a series of internet searches made shortly after Lisa's death. He had been looking up how different materials and conditions affect the rate of decomposition. As for the emails Lisa supposedly sent to her mom during the first month she was missing, those were also traced back to Alan's computer. Even more disturbing, detectives discovered that Alan had secretly installed spyware on Lisa's phone. It let him not only listen in on her calls, but also record them. That's how he got the audio clip he later used in the voicemail to her mom. This revelation suggested that the murder may have been premeditated, directly contradicting what Allen had told the undercover officers during his confession. Still, proving that Allen had planned the murder in advance was nearly impossible. In the end, prosecutors agreed to reduce the charge to second-degree murder, which carried a lighter sentence. Allen's lawyer also advised him to take the deal and plead guilty. It was the best way to avoid facing a first-degree murder charge. But even then, Allen insisted he acted in self-defense. He claimed he had been a victim of domestic abuse for years, saying that Lisa had physically assaulted him on multiple occasions. Prosecutors, on the other hand, argued that Allen had planned the murder in advance, and then spent years trying to cover it up. In the end, the judge ruled there wasn't enough evidence to convict Allen of second-degree murder. Instead, he was found guilty of manslaughter and sentenced to just 7 years in prison. Prosecutors immediately filed an appeal, and the court sided with them. Allen's sentence was reviewed and extended, but only by 3 more years, bringing his total to 10. Lisa's family and friends were outraged, not just by the light sentence, but even more so when Allen was granted early release after serving just 5 years. However, he quickly violated the terms of his parole and was sent back to prison, where he remained until 2022, when he was officially released. So while the punishment may have seemed shockingly lenient, the case still marked a rare and remarkable win for law enforcement. For an entire year, a team of undercover officers became part of Allen's everyday life, earning his trust and slowly guiding him into a carefully planned trap, where he finally gave up the dark secret he'd been hiding for years. It's also worth mentioning that after Allen's arrest, Lisa's children were placed in the care of her mother, and they've been living with her ever since. Share your thoughts on this story in the comments section, and don't forget to press the like button if you enjoyed my video. Thank you for watching.